In our continuation of lessons looking at the development of imperialism in the British Empire, and specifically talking about trade and commerce within the AQA specification, this lesson is going to actually explore the concept of the industrial empire, the industrial British Empire. And this involves essentially looking at the ways in which various areas of industry began to develop during this period, talking about water canals, talking about railways, talking about trade and shipping and all these different kinds of things. That's essentially going to be the purpose of this lesson, talking about the nature of the British Empire at the height of this industrialization. Now, you have to remember, of course, that the Industrial Revolution takes place in the 1800s. So one of the things that's really interesting is looking at the relationship between the Industrial Revolution and how this industrialization impacted and affected and benefited in some ways and didn't benefit in others, the British Empire, the imperialism. So, as a basic recap from the previous lesson, this is what we noted at the end of the previous lesson. We noted that as trade continued across the colonies, investment in the colonies grew. This was foreign direct investment, of course. This foreign direct investment led to industrialization in colonial areas, which would then further facilitate trade, which would then further facilitate investment, and so on. The cycle continues. All this led to the fact that by the end of the 1800s, 20% of Britain's imports came from the colonies, and over 33% of Britain's exports went to the colonies, went to the empire. And this becomes known as a concept known as the industrial empire, the industrial British Empire, the ways in which the British Empire was able to utilize the Industrial Revolution and utilize industrialization to benefit the empire, or at least benefit facilitation of trade and commerce across the empire. These are the ways and these are the examples of which we can utilize to show how this happened. Beginning first with shipping then. By the 1860s, sailing ships had reached their highest rate of efficiency. Remember, a lot of the economy is essentially aimed at improving efficiency and improving the rate of efficiency. It came with the development of what are known as clipper ships, and these clipper ships were eventually becoming ships that would sail around the world. The reason why clipper ships were so important in terms of their efficiency is because they were very fast and they suited very low volume, very high profit goods. And that's really where the empire begins to flourish in terms of its economic ability to develop certain trading in certain goods. So low volume, high profit goods included things like tea, which was very high profit, opium and spices. They were also able to carry mail and people. So because the British Empire was increasingly relying on the economic profits from these these low volume, high profit goods like tea and opium and spices, it meant that these ships, in being able to very quickly travel, being very, very fast ships and very, very well suited for these kinds of goods, meant that the efficiency for sailing and for trading goods of this nature was very, 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 very important. When it came to more bulky goods, heavier goods that required a lot more, but that required a lot heavier shipping, ships that were used were steamships. From the 1850s, for example, steamship companies reduced the travel time between Great Britain and West Africa. One of the major impacts that was had in relation to the 1860s, in 1869, of course, we see the opening of the Suez Canal, something we've spoken about in previous lessons. The Suez Canal drastically cuts travel time from the empire, from Great Britain and Europe and the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, because instead of having to go around the Horn of Africa, going around all the way to past Cape Colony in South Africa, you were able to cut through the Suez Canal, through the Middle East, and be able to trade in the Indian Ocean, trade across India, trade in Asia, trade going all the way into the Pacific Ocean, and trading all of around these areas as well. When it came to developments and interconnectivity on land, railways became one of the most important historical analysis. The empire highlights the importance the importance of something known as railway imperialism. Railway imperialism was essentially the use of railways and the growth of railways across various different parts of the empire, including Africa, including India as well. It became something of incredible importance for the empire since it was key to economic development. Areas such as West Africa essentially saw the development of railways, which provided a vital link between the interior areas of production and the sea, which could then be transported using various different shipping routes and various different shipping elements to be able to trade with these more interior parts of Africa. In addition to this, canals and rivers became a very important part of imperial production and imperial development. The internal river systems in places like, for example, the African continent became an important means for transport of trading products. So India also grew in terms of new canals which were developed, especially after 1857 on a huge scale. In addition to this, an area that we have spent a little bit less time talking about, but was still very important, was Britain's colonial control over places like Canada. Canada in 1867 saw the deepening of their canals around St. Lawrence, and the Great Lakes, and the seaway system and the Welland Canal, which was built to overcome the height difference between Lakes Erie and Ontario. All of which, of course, led to a deepening integration of Canadian trade and Canadian economic developments with the empire itself. So these are the different ways in which the empire was able to deepen its economic output, to efficiently increase its economic output, and to ensure a deeper integration of the empire with the rest of the world, essentially, the rest of the empire itself. And so now that we've looked at the trading system and commerce established in the British Empire, let's move on to now looking at some of the products that were the most important. And we've already explored and explained a couple of these, looking at tea and opium, for example, but let's think about agriculture beginningly. So beginning then with the agriculture, the impact of agriculture, the majority of the colonies were naturally agricultural. Okay, so for example, there were exceptions, of course, industrial places like India, but for the most part, tropical colonies such as South Africa produced goods that were just not available in Britain. So things like sugar, coffee, cocoa, groundnuts, opera, and palm oil were all agricultural products that were grown in tropical colonies that, of course, would not be grown in the wasteland that was Great Britain. Despite the production of these goods being generally quite small scale, the producers of these goods would often sell at whatever price that was offered. And so we see agricultural products being grown onto more large-scale plantations. These plantations were often run by the British, and they often paid very low wages for the work, and it was very, very difficult, labor-intensive work. In fact, a lot of plantation work is really where the beginnings of the Atlantic slave trade took its shape in and across the Americas. But in terms of the ways in which there was the utilization of plantations here, was not with slavery necessarily, but with something that was nearly akin to slavery, of course, with very low paid individual workers who were doing incredibly difficult and labor intensive jobs. Example of this was the transport of Indian coolies to West Indian colonies for fixed time periods. And if we turn our attention very quickly to India specifically, the most important product that came from India was that of tea. Tea became incredibly popular across the British Empire and is still very popular to this day. In terms of more heavy industry production, mining was very, very important. One of the reasons for industrial expansion and imperial expansion was the push to find new precious metals and new precious minerals. These materials became highly profitable trading across the empire. So, for example, the mining of tin in Nigeria was very beneficial and very profitable. The mining of gold along the Gold Coast in Africa, diamonds in Sierra Leone, all of which were very valuable. Copper was mined in North Rhodesia. Coal and gold was mined in southern Rhodesia. All of these discoveries, the one that attracted the most attention from the British and from British private individuals was gold in South Africa. Gold deposits were found in Witwatersrand in 1886. I'm trying to pronounce that correctly. I apologize if I've pronounced that incorrectly. What this did was lead to a gold rush in the region, something which correlated with the closing down of mines in places like Cornwall and England, which further facilitated the deepening of a gold rush into South Africa. Everyone then packed their bags and started to travel across the world to start mining for gold in these areas, to try and find and get as much of it as possible. Gold rushes like this took place in all kinds of parts of the world. There were gold rushes in the Americas. There was gold rushes in all of Africa, but mainly in this part of the world where we see in correlation, like I said, with the closing down of mines in places like England and specifically in Cornwall, when sort of the tin ran out in Cornwall, you start to see a huge migration of individuals. Over 30,000 miners went to travel to Transvaal mines to mine gold. And obviously, the result of that was a deepening of British interest in the area. Things became more popular when diamonds were discovered in the area around this time. And in 1890, the Kimberley Diamond Syndicate was formed in order to mine, to discover, and to sell off and to trade diamonds among this part of the world.